Mythology Uncovered explores the myths of ancient civilizations. Mythology Uncovered.
You know, we think we've got a pretty good handle on the Greek gods, right? Zeus, the chronic cheater, Hera, the super vengeful wife. But what if the stories that really define them for us aren't the originals at all? Today, we're going to peel back the layers, centuries of retellings, to figure out how much of what we think we know is ancient truth, and how much is just really, really good reinvention. Okay, let me just throw this out there right at the start. What if one of the most famous, most tragic stories in all of Greek mythology is basically a lie? Not the original story, anyway. What if the version we all know and tell is actually closer to a brilliant piece of fan fiction that totally warped how we see the gods at the center of it? I mean, when we think about the Greek gods, it's basically a divine soap opera, isn't it? And right in the middle of it all, you've got Zeus, king of the gods, whose reputation for not being faithful is pretty much legendary. They're super powerful, for sure, but they're also just so deeply flawed, so human. All their passions and jealousies, it's all larger than life, but at the same time, it feels kind of familiar. And of course, you can't talk about Zeus without talking about his famously furious wife, Hera, right? Her revenge plots against his lovers are like the backbone of so many myths. She's the classic scorned queen. She can't go after her super powerful husband, so she gets, well, creatively cruel with everyone else. And that dynamic, the cheater and the vengeful wife, that's pretty much what defines our whole pop culture idea of what life on Mount Olympus was like. And here they are, the whole crew, the 12 big Olympians. You can spot the famous ones right away. Zeus with his thunderbolts, Poseidon holding the trident, Athena in her helmet. We look at a picture like this and think, yeah, I know these guys. But do we, really? We're about to seriously challenge that idea by zeroing in on one story. A story that puts two of these gods, Poseidon and Athena, in a really, really unsettling light. Which brings us right to the heart of this whole thing. Let's call it the Medusa problem. It's this one story, involving Poseidon and Athena, an version of events that, when you stop and actually think about it, it just makes no sense at all. So the popular version, the one pretty much all of us have heard, goes like this. Medusa started out as a human woman, a priestess in Athena's temple, and she was stunningly beautiful. Her hair, especially, was just incredible. But that beauty caught the eye of the sea god, Poseidon, and he assaults her inside Athena's own sacred temple. And what happens next? This is the really shocking part. After this horrible violation in her own temple, you'd think Athena would go after Poseidon, but she doesn't. Nope. She punishes Medusa. She's the one who gets transformed into the monster we all know, the Gorgon with snakes for hair and a stare that turns men to stone. And right there, that's the whole problem. Why would Athena, the goddess of wisdom of all things, justice, strategy, punish the victim? It happened in her own sacred space. It's this huge contradiction that just doesn't sit right. It makes Athena seem petty and cruel and jealous, and people have been struggling with that question for centuries. But here's the thing. What if we've been asking the completely wrong question this whole time? So where did this version of the story even come from? Well, the answer might surprise you, because it's not from the oldest Greek myths, not at all. It was actually written hundreds of years later, in a totally different language by someone from a completely different culture. And here's our guy, the storyteller. The storyteller was a Roman poet named Ovid, and in his famous work, The Metamorphoses, he wasn't just writing down old myths like a historian. Oh no, he was an artist. He was actively reimagining them, adding all these juicy, dramatic, psychological twists that you just don't find in the original Greek stuff. And this really lays it out, doesn't it? In the original Greek myths, Medusa and her sisters were just born that way. They were Gorgons from the start. Monsters, end of story. There was no tragic backstory. Ovid made that entire thing up. He invented the beautiful priestess origin story, and in doing so, he turned a simple monster tale into this epic tragedy about divine injustice. Because, let's be honest, it just made for a way better story. Okay, I love this quote from one of our sources because it's just so direct. It says, Ovid's retellings read like fan fiction where everyone is more asshole than the original myth. And that's really it, isn't it? He took the characters we already knew, the gods, and he just dialed their worst traits up to 11. He made them more jealous, more petty, more vindictive. And it was brilliant poetry, for sure, but it also completely changed their characters. And it's his version, Ovid's version, that has pretty much defined Medusa's story for the last 2,000 years. Okay, so now we know the popular story is basically Ovid's invention. But let's actually go back to his version for a second. Because even inside that tragic retelling, people today are starting to see it differently, to find more complex layers. What if that so-called curse wasn't actually a punishment at all? And this is where modern interpretations get really interesting. Think about it. In the world of the gods, a goddess like Athena couldn't just directly punish a powerful male god like Poseidon. So what if the transformation wasn't a punishment, but a twisted kind of protection? A horrifying gift, yeah, but one that gave Medusa the power to utterly destroy any man who dared try to harm her again. Suddenly, it's not about being a victim anymore. It's about agency. Her gaze becomes a weapon. And Athena's act? It's not petty cruelty. It's a dark, calculated move, a kind of strategic roundabout justice. And once you realize this, that the storyteller matters so much, it's like a key that unlocks everything. It's not just about Medusa anymore. Once you start asking, hey, wait, who's telling this story? You suddenly see how many other gods have had their characters totally reshaped or flattened out over the centuries. Yeah, let's circle back to Poseidon for a second. In a lot of modern stuff, he's just kind of the grumpy uncle of the sea, right? But this quote nails it. His darker side, the violent, aggressive traits that are front and center in Ovid's story, we tend to just sweep those under the rug. It's like this mythological whitewashing, where we cherry pick the parts of the gods we like and forget the rest. Okay, now think about a god whose image has been totally twisted over time. Thanatos, the god of death. Immediately, you're picturing the Grim Reaper, right? A scary skeleton with a scythe. But just look at this piece of ancient Greek pottery. That winged figure on the right, that's Thanatos. And with him is his twin brother Hypnos, the god of sleep. And what are they doing? They're not violently reaping a soul. They are gently lifting the body of a fallen hero to carry him home. This was the Greek idea of Thanatos. Not some terrifying villain you should be scared of, but this quiet, dignified guide who gave heroes an honorable end. It is a world away from the scary Grim Reaper we think of today. And then there's Persephone. Her story gets the same kind of treatment. The version that always gets told is the abduction story, which paints her as this poor, helpless victim. And that's part of it, sure, but it's not the whole story. It totally flattens her character. The full myth shows us a seriously formidable goddess, the powerful queen of the underworld, who literally rules over the cycles of death and rebirth. You see, by ruling the underworld for half the year, she becomes the living symbol of nature's cycles. Her story isn't just about being a victim, it's this deep philosophical idea about balance. It's about how life and death, spring and winter, light and dark, they aren't enemies, they're connected. It's this beautiful reminder that from every single ending, something new is waiting to begin. So, okay, let's pull back and look at the big picture here. Why? Why do these stories keep changing? From the ancient Greeks to a Roman poet like Ovid, all the way to the books and movies we see today, these myths are never static. They are constantly being reshaped. And honestly, this is probably the biggest takeaway from all of this. Myths aren't facts carved in stone. They're not history textbooks. They're living, breathing stories. And every generation, every storyteller, whether it's an ancient poet or a modern novelist, retells them in a way that speaks to their own time. Ovid retold Medusa to talk about things his Roman audience cared about, like power and cruelty. And today, we retell her story to talk about things we care about, like trauma and agency and justice. But, and this is a really important but, there's one last thing to keep in mind. While it's awesome that we're re-examining these stories, we have to be a little careful. I love this quote that warns us not to be stupid, doofy moderns reading myth with modern expectations. Basically, we can't just slap our 21st century worldview onto these ancient stories and get mad when they don't fit. Really understanding a myth means holding two ideas at once. What does it mean to us today, and what might it have meant to the people who first heard it thousands of years ago? At the end of the day, myths are basically mirrors. The story Ovid told about Medusa, it reflected what the Romans were obsessed with: power, passion, dramatic change. The stories we tell about her today, they reflect what we're obsessed with: justice, gender, surviving trauma. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. If the stories we keep telling over and over are a mirror of who we are, what do our modern myths, our biggest movies, our best-selling books, our new legends, What did they say about us?